Yo, what is happening, guys? It is GM Cody here with another video. It's been a week, really, since I've done like a solo video. I planned on doing a bit for the past couple weeks, I've been talking about doing an overview of AD&D Second Edition, and that is what we're going to talk about tonight. Now, I thought we would start off this conversation doing this a little bit differently. I'm not going to go through any books yet per se. We might talk about rules and things, but I'm not actually going to go, step by step through the Player's Handbook and Dungeon Master's Guide, whatever tonight. Tonight, what I wanted to talk about is why do I love AD&D Second Edition? And it might be a little bit shorter video than what I usually do. You know, my videos are pretty extended, and I tend to ramble. But one reason this video is going to get cut off a little short is it's getting a little late. And I was invited at the last minute to Bear's stream talking about his fantasy game. And I wasn't expecting that. I didn't know he was doing a stream tonight, but I'm always happy to collaborate with people on games. And that was a lot of fun and really interesting. Before we start talking about AD&D, though, what else is going on the channel? So it's a pretty busy time, actually. So the Prowlers and Paragons game got canceled Sunday because one of the players had internet outage. But I think we're going to try to do that this coming Sunday, hopefully. Of course, that's, all up to everybody's schedules. Everybody's really busy and got jobs and kids, and, we're all adults. So we'll see how that goes. In fact, I haven't even asked anybody yet when we're actually rescheduling the game. So we did do an impromptu live stream on Sunday, and that was a whole lot of fun. Actually, Bear joined us on that, and a couple of my old gaming buddies, Chase and Vince, and we just shot the shit about comics and talked about some other stuff too, modern pop culture and whatnot. And that was really fun. And like I said, we're going to be doing more live streams. I do have another either stream or pre-recorded video, one or the other, with my oldest gaming buddy. Mr. Andrew will be joining us, and we'll be talking about miniatures, which I really haven't talked about it at all on this channel. Is that I'm a big miniature guy. I'm a big miniature wargamer. Even though lately I haven't been doing a lot of that, that's always been a part of my gaming hobby and repertoire is miniature gaming. And I'd like to talk a little bit more about miniature gaming. So I thought the perfect person to have on there is Andrew, since he's mainly a miniature gamer. And we probably going to talk about some old school Warhammer, old hammer, if you will. And not necessarily the rules, just the miniatures and how we approach the old hammer aspect of the hobby. But tonight, we are going to be talking about AD&D Second Edition. So like I was talking about in the previous video, AD&D Second Edition is really the first role-playing game that I got exposed to. And it was probably the first one I played, I think, amongst other games. And I wouldn't say it's necessarily my favorite edition of D&D, but it is definitely the most nostalgic for me. And I think it's like that with anybody. Whatever edition you started with is the version you're most nostalgic for. And AD&D Second Edition is the one that I get most nostalgic about. Now, my favorite edition of D&D just varies depending on what mood I'm in, really. But I'd say AD&D Second Edition is always, if somebody puts me on the spot and says, what's your favorite edition? I'm usually going to say Second Edition. Though I'm a big fan of the White Box. I'm a big fan of First Edition. And I'm a really big fan of Basic Expert, the Moldvay version. BECMI's cool too. Rules Cyclopedia and the BECMI stuff is really good too. But AD&D Second Edition has a special place in my heart. And I also think, like I was saying last time, I think it's kind of the redheaded stepchild of D&D. I don't see a whole lot of people talking about it. Even the old school guys seem to... It's a weird thing. It's a weird thing. It's kind of stuck between generations, I think. And I don't hear a lot of hate for it necessarily. I just don't hear a lot of love for it either. I think there's a lot to love about AD&D Second Edition, but there's a lot, there's problems with it too. and I'm going to point out the problems. It's not a perfect game system by any stretch, but I don't think any version of D&D is perfect. I might lose some subscribers over that. I don't really care. I really don't. Every version has its own feel and flavor, and it has its problems too. So let's talk about the cool stuff about AD&D Second Edition. So AD&D Second Edition, like every other, I'm going to reach down here for some books. I should have really put these in order that I was going to grab them. But AD&D Second Edition, like every other pretty much version of D&D, it's got the 3 core books that was really brought about with AD&D First Edition. You've got the Player's Handbook, which is all about making characters and spells and equipment and all that. Everything a player needs to make a character is in the Player's Handbook. You got the Dungeon Master's Guide. Now, the Dungeon Master's Guide, in my opinion, I don't think this is a bad book. Now, this is the... I should have mentioned those. I think everybody's privy to it, but those that aren't, there were 2 editions of AD&D Second Edition, and there's really not much difference between the 2. But, these versions, which I only had the Player's Handbook of, these came out in 1989. And these came out, I think, in 1995, which is the time about around the time I started getting into it. So these were the first AD&D books I saw, were the black covered ones. But there's really no difference between the rules. These were just reorganized, and they have different art and whatnot. And yeah, so I mean, they're essentially the same thing. But the Dungeon Master's Guide, I don't think it's a bad book. The Second Edition Dungeon Master's Guide, but in my opinion, I think it's one of the weakest Dungeon Master's Guides in all editions of D&D. And this is not really one I commonly reference when I'm playing Second Edition. To be honest, I usually carry around the First Edition DM's Guide when I'm running a Second Edition game because it seems much more useful to me. This one does have some useful stuff in it, and it's fine for what it is. It just doesn't have, if you're an experienced DM, which I guess I consider myself one, this book really doesn't serve many uses for me. Though I will say it's fairly necessary if you want to play Second Edition, because it does, have some essential rules in here. Now, you could get by without those rules, but it does have some essential rules in here, like level limits, and it's got more detailed rules on combat and magic and how to give spells and stuff like that. So there is some, essential things in here if you're playing Second Edition. I wouldn't skip out on getting it. I don't think it's a bad book, but I will say I think it's the weakest Dungeon Master's Guide, outside of probably maybe 4th edition or something. I don't know. And the 5th edition Dungeon Master's Guide, I don't even remember what that looks like, to be honest, because I haven't looked at 5th edition books in a long time. Anyways, moving on. And then you have the Monster Manual. Again, this is the reprint Monster Manual. The reprints Wizard of the Coast did a few years ago. I bought one to replace my copy, which I still hadn't drug out in the bedroom. For some reason, it's in the bedroom on top of my comic books, I think, because I just like looking at it all the time. I don't really know. And I didn't drag it out. My copy's battered and tattered, and that's why I got this to replace that. And, this is nice and well bound, and it's held up well, even though already has soda and coffee and beer stains on it. But anyways, and I want to say, this is, in my opinion, this is my favorite Monster Manual. So, and we talked about it last time. If you didn't catch the last video, the Monster Manual is actually what got me into playing D&D specifically. So, again, it might just be nostalgia talking, but that's my favorite Monster Manual. Take it as you will. That's just my opinion. I really love the art in that one. I love the descriptions and the statistic blocks, and it's really great to look at. And of course, they also had the Monstrous Compendium, which I think came out first before the Monster Manual. And it was like a big binder format. Unfortunately, I don't have the Monstrous Compendium. Excuse me. And I really need to get a copy of that just to have it, because I'm pretty nostalgic about looking at the Monstrous Compendium. But it was pretty cool. It was a big binder, and you could actually take out each page, each entry of monsters out separately. That was kind of the idea, and you could add to it to create this giant, Monstrous Compendium, and it was pretty cool. So that's worth having too if you wanted, if you were wanting to play AD&D Second Edition. That's a worthy thing to have. There's a lot of other books for AD&D Second Edition. AD&D Second Edition kind of probably started the supplement bloat. Okay. So you had, again, I'm going to reach down here and grab some books. You had these guides that came out. I have tons of these. I only grabbed one of them off my shelf, but I have a lot of them. I don't have all of them. There's a lot of them, but I have quite a few of them. These complete books for each class, like they had the complete fighters, complete paladins, etc., etc. And I have quite a few of those. They had a complete equipment guide. They had historical books. They just had tons and tons of these, little complete guides that were fairly useful, I think. They're pretty cool. I definitely like them. They have some cool ideas. I think these are the kind of thing, like, I wouldn't allow players to use everything in here, but I wouldn't disallow it either. There's some optional rules in here and more equipments, and they had a thing in here that was introduced in AD&D Second Edition, and I think it's a Second Edition exclusive thing only for classes called kits. And if you don't know what kits are, basically they're kind of like an expanded version of your class. They don't add, they basically just give you a little small bonus with a little bit of a disadvantage. All right, that's basically what kits do. Now, some of them aren't particularly balanced. Some of them give a bigger advantage than they do disadvantage. But it's cool. It gave a little bit more character to your class. So instead of just being a fighter, you're a berserker or you're a swashbuckler or whatever, And every class book has those kits in it, and I think the kits are pretty cool. I've never had a problem with them. I've never had a problem with players picking them out. I don't usually tell players about the kits. I've rarely bring those books along if I'm running a campaign, but if a player has one of those books and they're like, hey, I want to play one of these kits in the book, I'll take a look at it and yeah, sure, cool. And like I said, they have some extra rules. And the cleric's book is really cool because it's got creating your own pantheons, and the wizard kind of does the same thing with creating spells, and it's got so they will expand your game, and they're worth having. I think they're cool. The other thing AD&D Second Edition had was they had other supplement books, and these were called players options. Again, I have a few of these, but I just grabbed a couple off the shelf. So you had players options, combat and tactics, players options, skills and powers. This is a very late addition to Second Edition. This came out at the tail end of Second Edition. Combat and tactics came out a little earlier. And you had the Tome of Magic and Magic and Spells or something like that, which were essentially the same thing, a little bit different. One was just a revised and expanded version of the other. And all these books did was expand the game with more options and more ways to play the game. So I think all these books are pretty cool. Combat and Tactics is probably my favorite out of it. If you really like miniatures and you really want to incorporate miniatures in your D&D game, this game is really cool. Not just miniatures either. It's got the full miniature rules in there and stuff. But it also has just more options for combat. So it's got the critical hit tables, kind of like in Rollmaster. It's got a similar kind of thing. Fumble tables. It's got a dueling system. It's got more weapons and more armor. It's got expanded rules for, weapon specialization and mastery. It's got stuff for different attack options. And yeah, so it's definitely worth having, and it's probably one of my favorite of the player's option books. Also like the Magic one, which I used to have that. I don't know what happened to it, so I guess I need to replace that. I really like that book too. It's got a lot of options and alternate magic systems. It's got a magic point system in there, which we did play with back in the day and quite enjoyed. And like I said, there's 2 versions of that, and there is some differences between them, but I can't remember the differences. I'd actually have to look at the book. And that reminds me, I need to replace that book. Skills and powers, like I said, this came out at the tail end of AD&D 2nd edition. So I remember my cousin being a big fan of skills and powers when this came out. And so that's the only reason I bought the book. I don't remember my regular group being that into skills and powers. We used it a little bit. And this really changed how the game is played, sort of. So what this book did is it kind of completely changed how you make characters, and it presented a little bit more options, more customization, how you can customize your character. And it was almost like a point-buy system with the classes. You pick a class, and then you get a certain amount, and your race too, and you get a certain amount of points to spend on each of those. And you could customize your class and race a little bit more. It had character kits in here. If you didn't want to use those rules, you could still have there's kits in here. There's expanded rules for proficiencies and magic and psionics, and there's a lot more races in here. So this book is useful even if you don't want to use the expanded character creation system, the character point system. Another thing this version did was it broke down each stat, each attribute, ability score, what have you, into 2 ability scores, which is fine, whatever. And I never had a problem with playing with skills and powers, though it's not a particularly popular, addition to 2nd edition. I don't think it's a bad thing either. I think there's a lot of useful stuff in there. If you just wanted a lot more options to make a character, skills and powers is cool. And so there's that. Like I said, they also had a lot of historical books. I don't have any of those and never have. I've looked at them, physically and otherwise. And those are really cool. They had a Viking one and a Celtic one. I don't remember what else. And those are really, really neat and worth having, though a little bit pricey to get a hold of nowadays, it seems. The other thing AD&D 2nd edition was known for and famous for, and one of its best qualities, was the settings. This was the era of TSR really creating a bunch of different unique settings for AD&D. And I don't have all the settings. I've never particularly been a big setting guy, but I like settings to cull ideas from. But I do, overall, I think the AD&D 2nd edition settings are really cool. And they had some really cool ideas. And I've played in a lot of those settings in other people's games and my own games. I have ran, I don't always run my D&D or fantasy games in my setting. I also run games I'll run games in other settings occasionally. And I have done so with a lot of these settings from AD&D 2nd edition. And there were a lot of good ones. So I don't have all of them or anything. And some of these are missing box sets because the boxes have fallen apart. Al-Qadim, this was a cool one and not very often talked about. A lot of people seem to hate this one. It was basically like a, Arabian Nights kind of adventures kind of thing. Always thought it was cool. Never had a problem with it. Never played it, but I thought it was cool. Of course, Forgotten Realms, which I don't hate Forgotten Realms like everybody else seems to, but I'm not in love with it either. I do think Forgotten Realms had some really cool stuff in it, and I love reading the fluff and lore, and I have tons and tons of Forgotten Realms books over there, and just like reading the stuff. And I've ran games in Forgotten Realms. And I've talked about this before, but my suggestion, especially with Forgotten Realms, but this goes with any setting, is, you don't have to follow everything in the setting. Make the setting your own and let your players know that that's the way it's going to be. So when I've ran Forgotten Realms, I've made it my own. I don't necessarily follow it to the letter. Of course, most of my players don't know Forgotten Realms that well anyway, so they don't know the difference. Ravenloft, really cool setting. Love this one. Now, I have played in Ravenloft. What Ravenloft is, if you don't know, it's gothic horror, essentially. And it's this world that's blocked off from all the other planes and dimensions. And there's these domains ruled by a evil overlord, essentially. That could be a vampire or just, an evil mage or whatever. It does, specifically lay out each of these domains and everything. And it's not impossible to travel between domains, but it's very difficult. Okay. And it's a gothic horror setting, essentially, at its core. All right. So, think classic Hammer horror, mixed with D&D and, all those classic black and white and color horror films, and mix it with D&D, and that's Ravenloft, essentially. And I think Ravenloft's awesome. I haven't ran a Ravenloft game on its own, per se. I've always had people, like a group, walk through a mist and they're in Ravenloft. I've done that quite a few times, and they're trying to find their way back. At some point or another, I would like to run a straight up Ravenloft game, or Ravenloft inspired game. Again, there's things in Ravenloft I don't particularly care for, but overall, I love that gothic horror. I love classic horror movies, and I'm wearing my Monster Vision shirt here, and I think a Ravenloft type setting or game would be really cool. I do have Dark Sun over there. I can't find it. Of course, if you look way back over there, back over that way behind my shelves, you can see peeking out there is the poster from the Dark Sun box set. And that's been hanging up for a while. I really love Dark Sun. It's probably my favorite setting from AD&D 2nd Edition, and essentially it's a post-apocalyptic setting to some degree or another. This whole world's been ravaged by sorcery, and it's pretty. I'm not going to go all into it, but it's basically like a post-apocalyptic wasteland kind of Mad Max mixed with D&D, right? Really cool setting. And I have the box set somewhere. I can't find it, and I didn't look too hard for it, but there is Dark Sun. There was also Birthright, which was really cool. And Birthright was all about, lineages and bloodlines and becoming like, kings and nobles and stuff like that, and ruling over your lands and things like that. That was kind of the whole, theme of Birthright. And Birthright was really interesting. I have ran a game inspired by Birthright, not straight up Birthright though, but I took a lot of the ideas from Birthright. That setting is pretty expensive to get a hold of now, but you can find copies, and I think you know what I mean. It's got a lot of ideas if you want to run that like kingdom building kind of campaign, which I did run a few years ago. I've talked about it briefly, and I took a lot of the ideas from Birthright to run that campaign. So that setting is definitely worth looking at if you're wanting to run that kind of campaign. I feel like I'm forgetting something. I probably am. Needless to say, there was quite a few settings and cool ones, if not just for ideas for AD&D 2nd Edition. And they produced all kinds of modules for them and supplements and all kinds of good stuff. So AD&D 2nd Edition, it's hard for me to break down. Why do I love this game so much? It's a good question. Because it's not a perfect game. And again, I might lose subscribers over that, but I don't think it's a perfect game. I think there's problems with it, and there's cool things about it. So I think one thing I like about AD&D 2nd Edition is its grounded fantasy. And I like grounded, well, as grounded as fantasy can be, right? It's a little bit, less super heroic. You start off at the bottom and you work your way up. It's not like modern D&D where you're already a damn hero and become a superhero, right? I understand why people enjoy that flavor of fantasy, just not for me. I enjoy, Lord of the Rings, and Elric might not be a good example. Either will Conan, really, to be honest with you. But I do enjoy those fantasy stories. Wheel of Time would be a good example. Even though I'm not like Wheel of Time super fan, I do enjoy it to some extent. And the thing I really enjoyed about Wheel of Time was, the world building, but also enjoyed, these characters that didn't have, were not heroes, started off from nothing and became heroes, right? And that's the classic, to me, that's like the classic D&D formula. And AD&D second edition does that really well, I think. It strikes a really good balance between like first edition or BX or white box. That's just like, several people lately have described it to me as, D&D, fantasy Vietnam, which is pretty accurate. It's a little bit better than that, right? Like it's not quite fantasy Vietnam, but it's still, it's still tough, right? Like you're still, level 1 wizards still having a hard time. You're still casting one spell a day, and it's got a lot of those same things. But it strikes a fair balance there. And this brings me to my next point, which AD&D second edition also introduced me to the idea, and I don't remember where it is in the book. I think it's in the introduction, and David Zeb Cook, who wrote the rules, who I would like to talk to sometime, and he's interested in doing so, but that's a whole nother thing. I think it's in the introduction. It was the first time I had heard mention of house rules, right? And that really inspired me when I was a youngster and reading through the book, and it mentioned, hey, there's people that, take the game as you will, do as you will, change the rules as you will, and that there was this idea of you can make the game your own. And second edition, I don't think it's obviously, what's the word? It's not the original proponent of that. But it turned me on to it. So, and the other cool thing about AD&D second edition that I like a lot is it's modular, which I don't think a lot of people know or understand. Though I think most of you do, but those that don't or that haven't played AD&D second edition, it's a modular system right from the get-go. Even in the player's handbook, a lot of things are mentioned, are stated, not mentioned. They're stated as options. Okay. And you're supposed to build the game in layers however you wish, So there's the core rules, and those are not supposed to be options, but they can be. And then, they introduce things like proficiencies and, I don't know, even like the expanded classes like Rangers and Paladins and things like that are presented as options. They're not presented as the core of the game. So that was something that really struck home with me about AD&D second edition. And of course, in the supplement books, they expanded that even more. They just gave you more options, more modularity to your game. And we talked about that with Rollmaster too. Rollmaster second edition especially does this really well. And AD&D second edition does this really well. And, so I've always made D&D my own. I don't really play rules as written anymore and haven't for some time, even though occasionally I'll revert back to rules as written. When I was younger, I did. We played strictly by the rules. I had the rules memorized, and I'm very good with rules usually. But as I've gotten older, I tend to just make the game my own and have fun. And that's one thing I like about all versions of old school D&D, and it's no exception AD&D second edition, is that it's very easy to tweak and house rule without breaking the game, because there's not much wire holding things together. You can remove a lot of things from AD&D second edition without breaking the core of the game. And you can change things without breaking the core of the game. There might be some people that disagree with that, but I've been doing it for years and it hasn't altered anything. So that is something to note. I think it's really easy to house rule. So if that's something you're interested in, AD&D second edition might be the way to go. And like I said, any of the old versions of D&D are really good at this. Now, what was the bad things about AD&D second edition? So, I don't think this is the game for everybody. I'm not trying to sell you. Well, I sort of kind of trying to sell you, but not really trying to sell you on playing AD&D second edition. I'm just telling you about the game and why I like the game. But there are things I don't like about AD&D second edition. So one thing about AD&D second edition, and it's probably going to turn a lot of people off about it, is it's still old school D&D. At its core, it's still built on the foundation that was original D&D that became, AD&D and became AD&D second edition, which is a bonus too in my eyes because it's backwards compatible. You can use things from first edition and BX and even white box, I guess, pretty interchangeably, and that's a bonus to me. But it can also be a negative in its against it because it is not it's old school D&D. It doesn't have unified mechanics. It's got roll over for some things and roll under for some things, and it's got negative armor class. It's got percentile base, thief skills. But for ability checks, you're rolling under, or proficiency checks, you're rolling under your score. And it's got all the wonky things like bin bars, lift gates, and open doors, and system shock and Thaco, which I don't have a problem with, but it's got all those hold-ons from old school D&D. Now, none of that stuff bothers me because I grew up playing it, so I'm just used to it. Do I think there's better ways of doing things? Yeah, probably. But it's fine. It works, right? It works. And again, there's a lot of these things that could be house ruled if you wanted to. So, what else do I have to say about AD&D second edition? AD&D second edition is very easy to house rule, and one of the reasons is because it is old school D&D. It's pretty rules light. It's really easy to tinker with, but it's also easy to run a game. So if you're a game master, it's really easy to run a game of AD&D second edition. Once you grasp the basic mechanics, which are not complicated, it's really easy to set up encounters, which I don't really call them encounters, but that's a good name for it, sure. And things like that. It's really easy to set up dungeons and adventures and what have you. Because the stat blocks for making NPCs or making monsters is really quick and basic and easy. And even making characters doesn't take that much time. There's not that many, if you're not using all the options books, and even then, it's not going to take you much time to make a character for AD&D second edition. You're going to roll your stats, you're going to pick your race, you're going to pick your class, and then you're going to buy equipment, right? So, and of course, you're probably going to buy proficiencies and all that stuff, but none of this takes much time. I mean, I could, of course, I'm really experienced in rolling up AD&D characters, but it would take me, literally 5 minutes, to roll up an AD&D second edition character if I really wanted to. So, I think that's a bonus. The other negative thing about it, like we were talking about, it's old school D&D. So as rules as written, it's a fairly deadly game, right? I mean, like I said earlier, magic users are still rolling 1d4 and things like that. And, characters can drop and die pretty quickly. Of course, they present options in the books, like the negative 10 hit points, which is actually a thing from first edition, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember seeing that in the first edition DM's guide. so they present options like that. Now, when we first played it, 0 hit points was death back in the day. So things like that never bother me. But that might be something that bothers players, and I know it does. I've ran AD&D games for people in the past, and I know it bothers them. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I just kind of wanted to give a general overview of AD&D 2nd Edition, what we're going to be talking about. And it's a little bit of a short video and probably not a very interesting one. I don't know. It's probably, but hopefully you guys enjoyed it a little bit. And I will definitely maybe be making a bonus video this week since this one's a little shorter. And we'll dive deeper into AD&D 2nd Edition and probably first look at the Player's Handbook. And then we might go on to look at some of the other books and supplements. Of course, down the road, we definitely will. Like I said, probably next week, maybe this week, we're going to have Andrew on the channel talking some Old Hammer, talking some old school miniatures. Specifically, when I say Old Hammer, that just means, any kind of old miniatures from the 80s and 90s. And, me and him are avid collectors of that stuff. The interesting thing about that is, I tend to like the old rule systems too, but Andrew actually plays a lot of modern rules with the old miniatures. So we're going to have a conversation about that and maybe talk about some other stuff. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Make sure to give me a thumbs up if you do. It just helps me gauge whether you guys like the video or not and whether I should do more videos like that. And I also wanted to say, we did the live stream. When was that? Sunday. And we had a lot of our community pop in. I'm really liking this community we're building. And I didn't give any shout outs to any of those people, so I'm going to do so now. Mage's Musings, make sure to go check out his channel if you haven't already. He's a really cool, pretty much exclusively 1st edition AD&D dude, which I really respect and I think it's really cool. He does all this stuff he does with puppets, and it makes it fun and entertaining. He does recaps and reviews and all kinds of stuff, and it's pretty much all 1st edition or old school D&D related. Elfbait, we had Elfbait becoming a really good friend of mine. He's just restarting his channel. It seems like he hasn't been posting any videos lately, but he has been doing some live streams on I think Saturday mornings, so just go to his channel and check it out. And we usually all pop in there. I usually don't get an opportunity to pop in there because my computer is not available on Saturday mornings for whatever reasons. But I always tune in, and it's always really fun and interesting. He also pops in from time to time to other people's streams. Really cool dude, really thoughtful guy, really smart guy, and he's always got good things to say. Of course, go check out Bear the Gen X GM's channel. He's a really cool guy, good friend of mine, and he's got a great voice. And then also go check out Gaming with ADHD. He's got a really great channel. He uploads tons of videos every week and does live streams about all kinds of games. Mostly new stuff coming out, which is cool because this is stuff I'm not really usually pay attention to or aware of. And also go check out From the Hills channel. He's got a really small channel right now, and we're trying to help him grow. He's been doing a lot of live streams. I don't think he's been posting videos as such. He's just been live streaming a lot. He's got his own fantasy game that I plan on reviewing sooner than later, even though I got a backlog of stuff here. But I will be reviewing your game. And he talks about that. He also is a huge G.I. Joe fan, and yeah, really cool dude. So go check out his stuff. And yeah, I just wanted to give a shout out to everybody in the community because I didn't do so Sunday, and I felt bad about it because I was kind of distracted by the conversation we were having. And I'm not really used to live streaming, so that was a brand new thing for me. Anyways, I'm going to cut the video off here. Hope you guys enjoyed. We'll see you next time. Peace.